cases that have like that bumper kind of thing. I gotta buy a new one.
Hey guys, so I'm here at Barnes & Noble in New York City in the Upper East Side, getting ready for an event with Chakraborty and Melissa Albert and Roshani Chockshi. It's going to be amazing.
I'm super excited about the character.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name's Kristen and I have a YouTube channel which is called Super Space Chick. Shannon Chakraborty, Melissa Albert, and Roshani Chockshi, who are going to come out right now. I think.
Please do not touch what?
Connection.
There's a plug.
Look at electrocuted assault space and Mythology. Just to start out, does everyone want to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your book?
I'll just be like, oh, it's shiny. I like the cover. Okay, fine. Hi, I'm Roshani. So the Gilded Wolves it's like National Treasure with more attractive people. So I hope that you like that movie. I certainly do. I just wanted to play with like an ensemble cast and put them in my favorite city. And so that's my pitch for the book. But there's also, of course, like post-colonialism agenda, etc.
My book is The Hazelwood, and I haven't described it in a very long time, so let me see what I can do. I like to describe it as fairy tale noir. It's about a girl whose grandmother wrote a cult collection of fairy tales, and when she reaches a certain age, she discovers that all of the weird bad luck in her life has to do with this fairy tale book, and that the world behind the book is very real, and out to get her.
Hello. First, thank you all for coming out here on this cold work school night. I am Shannon Chakraborty. This is my book, The Kingdom of Copper. It is book 2 in the Daevabad trilogy, which is about a thief from 18th century Cairo and a Jinn prince and political revolution.
They're all so good. Each of your books has a very lush setting, and I wanted to find out, how did you decide where to set the book and what its relation is to the real world?
Do you want me to start since he's not?
Yes, I do.
So my book started very strangely. It wasn't supposed to be a book. It was supposed to be this weird world building project I worked on while I was working a job that I hated, and I wanted to go back to graduate school for medieval Islamic history. And I started working on this little world building project of adding magic to some of the places and eras that I really liked. And the way I did this was by looking at traditional Jinn folklore. You know, we have this idea that they're these unseen spirits who live beside us. They have very long lives. I'm a history buff. I thought that was really cool. I was like, yes, I would like to live for hundreds of years and quietly spy on humans. That would be neat. So I started writing this book and setting this world, and I had so much of the politics and the history and the place done already that a lot of it was easy when I finally got to a plot. I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to use the magical city of Daevabad, which I'm going to model off this particular city of Kaf that's supposed to be behind the green hills, and it's where magical spirits are. So just pulling in a lot of real world history was how I built mine.
Mine is a portal fantasy, so it starts in the real world, and then from there I kind of envision it as like a level by level descent into increasingly weird sort of fairyland. And I started it in New York because I live here, and because I have the outsider's perspective. I like love it in the way only an outsider can, like that particular, like I loved it from afar, and now I'm here, and I love it still. So it's like specific, but like a little bit gilded, like that idea of New York that you have when you don't know it as well as people who grew up here. And then I don't want to say too much about the back half of the book, but it's weird and fairy tale-ish and dark.
Yeah, you want to like drive through it, but like really fast. It's still like all terrifying. So I love the city of Paris. I've been a couple times. It's really magical. But when I was writing The Gilded Wolves, I wanted to set it in La Belle Epoque era, which is 1889 Paris. To me, I thought it was going to be just Moulin Rouge and champagne and chandeliers and everyone's having a ball. It's going to be great. It is not that. As like you go further into history, and I ended up finding out a lot about like my own heritage. For example, 1889 was when they had the World Fair of Paris. This was when they actually built the Eiffel Tower to serve as the entrance to this collection of all these Western powers talking about how great they were. But with all that greatness came a lot of ugliness and dark roots of imperialism. This was when they had human zoos, and it was the highest attraction. And it was something that spoke to me very personally, because my mother is from the Philippines. And in the 1904 St. Louis World Fair, they had a human zoo where they brought in indigenous Filipinos and literally put them on display. So for me, the world that I was building, even though it was an alternate Paris, I still wanted to talk about that question of power and the question of who owns the past, and what it looks like if you are someone like me, someone from a marginalized background, and to live in that world that's so gorgeous, to earn the name The Beautiful Years, that always to belong to the sidelines of it.
My next question is for you, Roshani. How involved were you with all of the visuals of like the puzzles and the diagrams that were in the Gilded Wolves?
That was all, unfortunately, my idea. And I gave myself so many headaches. I was like, I'm not smart enough for this. What's binary? It's just two numbers. I still don't get it. Like, things like that. But it was really fun. I love puzzles, actually, and I love riddles, and I love how, like, when you get to like that treasure hunt aspect of your favorite movies or something, there's always like that twist, like, oh no, it's not a map at all. It's a song, or it's not that, or it's something. I don't know. But that capacity for something to be hidden and to surprise you, and that you only get that surprise factor by how well you know what it's supposed to be.
In the Hazelwood prior to coming up with Alice and her mother's story?
You know, I didn't, but I wrote the table of contents really, really early in the process. I've said this before, but I kind of envision it as like when you look down the list of Twilight Zone episodes, like a season of Twilight Zone episodes, and you're like, oh, what's that? I wanted to have that same kind of like microcosm embedded in each title. Like I wanted to have like an idea of what each tale would like kind of feel like, but I did not write them until I started actually working on the book. But I have, you know, visions for each one.
I'm very excited to get the book of fairy tales when you come out with that. And Shannon, when you were writing City of Brass, how did you craft like all of the political aspect and like come up with a hierarchy within the palace?
I really wanted to look, without completely spoiling aspects of the book, I really wanted to look at how a city is built over thousands of years and what it's like when different peoples come in, often violently, sometimes peacefully, and they occupy it and they change it, and how that changes certain groups and what it means to be a member of a group where this is your home, this is your sacred city, you are the majority, and you haven't been ruling for centuries. And I really wanted to embed that in a lot of nuance about why, what brought this revolution to the forefront. So I looked at a lot of history and then a lot of just what was happening today. I mean, when I was writing the book, there were scenes in the book I was watching my country occupy Iraq, and there were scenes I wanted to show that's ugly, and that you know, the characters, some of the characters are coming from the point they belong to the people who are the oppressors. And what does it mean when you're young and you start to realize, wait, what if I'm the villain? What does that mean for how I conceive of myself? What I'm supposed to do now if I think I'm a good person? So I wanted to just pull from a lot of these conflicts and the way we fight them, and just that it's the same thing really over and over again.
Each of your books is heavily rooted in mythology and fairy tales. So I wanted to know, what are some of your greatest influences when you were writing, and what inspired you to go with the tale that you did?
If I tell you, it's actually a huge spoiler, so I honestly cannot, but it is brilliant, I think. Probably not. I don't know. But I will say that when we were actually talking about this earlier, Kristen. So when I was in high school, we read the poem Paradise Lost. Has anyone read Paradise Lost? And it has like this great epic line that just floored 15-year-old Roshani. And the line was, "I would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven." And it was the line that Lucifer said after he was cast out of heaven. And my response was, I bet he's really hot. That literally sounds like something like only like a really hot guy can get away with saying. I was like, I like it. Anyway, but it was, quotes like that end up inspiring me a lot. That was the quote that actually was the launching point for the Star-Touched Queen, which was my debut, and it's a Hades and Persephone retelling with Hindu mythology. And I really wanted to tackle the idea of that quote, but a girl that wants power. And it was like, well, if I was an underworld queen, I don't know. That doesn't sound so bad. Kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to do was subvert, you know, existing kind of the standard canon of like Charles Perrault type tales, make them a little bit more female-centric. I'm working on the tales now, and I'm like, maybe one should have like a man in the center. I'm like, I can't, but I'm trying. Yeah, just kind of exposing the seams around the ideas of like women who wait. Oh, I don't know if you guys have read Amal El-Motar's, I believe that's how you pronounce her last name, Seasons of Iron and Glass.
I loved it.
It's so good.
It's so, oh, and she has like a poetry collection called The Honey Month, which is also amazing.
And a novel coming out.
Why is she
Yeah,
not here? Is she here?
I'm going to eject myself from the sessions here. This is not my work, but I'm going to talk about her really quick. So this story, Seasons of Iron and Glass, is taking on the trope of there's like a tale where a woman is sitting on a glass hill while suitors like fight at her feet to like get up to her. And then there's another tale, many tales, have women they have to wear through 7 pairs of iron shoes before they can like get their love. So it's just, I just love like tales that subvert the ideas of the horrors that are inflicted on women's bodies in fairy tales, and they're celebrated for like waiting. They're celebrated for not talking until their 7 swan brothers all have like jackets, or whatever.
That's my favorite summary for the piece of
Go shopping brothers. Yeah. So I'm inspired by that, but also by like tales that subvert those tropes that I already love.
I mean, people always look at my book and they go, oh, that must be, a retelling of 1001 Nights. And it's not. I mean, I like a lot of old folk tales, and I pulled from that, but there are so many more that go beyond the Nights. We have Tales of the Marvelous and News of the Strange, and a lot of the heroic epics I pulled into that, because I liked they did the same mix of sort of historical fantasy, but 1400 years ago, they were looking at a different set of historical fantasy. They weren't just talking about King Arthur, they were talking about the Prophet Suleiman and the Queen of Sheba and a lot of those ideas. So I took from that, I mean, those tales, like, I'm a fantasy writer, and I will never match the imagination in some of these stories. I mean, they'll have, like, a centaur is fighting a robot, not a robot, an automated statue, like a statue that moves on its own, and it's just, then they throw in, of course, like the beautiful princess, and a man that turns into a parrot, and it's great. So I wanted to like have a lot of those fun elements, but I also, again, pulled a lot from history, and there were, people always ask me, is there a certain scene that was really inspired by something, and I like to talk about it because it's creepy. I have a scene in my first book where, spoilers, they come upon, the prince who's leading the city comes upon a cavern of you've read my book, of bodies that have just been preserved for centuries, and that was brought about by probably a story that's kind of stretched the truths because you're trying to make the person sound bad, but the first caliph of the Abbasid Caliphate, Al-Mahmoud, he is known for one day, he was going to leave on Hajj, and he was slightly concerned that if he died, people might find this thing he had. So he roped in his daughter-in-law, because his son was not around, and they talk about how they went in through the palace and down under all these levels, and she thought there was going to be treasure or riches, and it wasn't. It was just the bodies of all of his enemies, and in particularly, so yeah, this is what we're going to talk about at dinner. And the bodies of the Alids, who were the religious family that they were opposing, and that they were considered so dangerous that even their bodies had to be hidden. And, it's things like that when you're reading history that leap across the centuries and really, it kind of brings home a lot of the issues and, humanity and complexity, because I read that and I was like, right, my father-in-law is a saint. So that's my one story for something that was directly inspired.
Are there any particular themes that you like to weave into your work to leave readers to think about?
Yeah, I mean, so one question that we get a lot about the Gilded Wolves is, are there wolves? No, the wolves are a metaphor, actually. Although I do really like wolves in stories, but that's not the point. The point being, if you read the book, you'll come across the line. But one thing that I really like to ask in all of my books is the question of who's telling you the story, right? And that's a really powerful thing about myth-making and fairy tales in general. They exist as ways to explain the unexplainable around us. They are things of comfort, talismans that we hold on to and feel that perhaps they will guide us through. And history itself is its own story, and that was one of the driving questions for the Gilded Wolves. And who owns the past? How do these objects get into museums? Why would you use the term salvage when what you really mean is stole? And how, when you're thinking about history and those myths, to always consider both sides of it. And I would hope that my readers feel that way too when they get to the end of a book, that they just question what's gold and ask if it's gilded or something like that.
One of the things I really wanted to show with both of my books, the entire trilogy really, was the how do we look in science fiction and fantasy about who saves the day. And I think a lot of times we like, the lone rider comes in and it's one action or it's one quick revolution and everything's fine. And I really wanted to take that apart because political change is incredibly difficult and it's not usually the handsome revolutionary. It's the 20 people who have been shoved into a room and are trying to fix the town charter. And for every 2 steps they make forward, they make 1 step back. They all have to compromise and they usually all hate each other by the end. And I really wanted to show that especially breaking sort of the idea of what history has done to us and what we all do to each other does take a lot of work, and you don't always know you're going the right way. You might feel like you're going the wrong way, and that was something I really wanted to show in the Kingdom of Copper, that they're working together, and it's on this project that to so many people seems ridiculous, doesn't seem even worth the effort, and it's just, again, making these really small steps to make peace, and it requires bravery and time that I don't think we give a lot of people credit for.
I like the idea that everyone has their own story and that within a novel you could kind of like follow anyone's trail and you would find a story there. So even if characters' paths collide for some time, like that doesn't mean they don't have a story that began and that will continue on, after they parted ways. And through that lens, like there's no such thing as a sidekick or a villain. I love also that kind of world building, this is less thematic, but the idea that you're seeing like a story through a keyhole and you're seeing the world through a keyhole too. So I like kind of the world building, which is where you feel like you're seeing like a little corner of it, but there's so much more to explore, and that's really exciting, especially for a book that's the first in a series.
Well, I want to wander through your really creepy fairy tale world, but again, quickly, and with a way to get out. Oh wait, I would like for us to pause, and I'll say shame, shame, shame. That's
Shame.
Come back, giant come back.
Late for my friends.
I know. He's late. I said 7. He's like, I'll be there at 7:30. Yeah, I didn't tell you. Anyway. Thank you guys for indulging me. He did that, by the way, when my fiance finally met my whole family at our family reunion. He paused everybody and was like, let's all just clap. And it was mortifying. And we just wanted to unzip the earth and fall into it. So I've been waiting for this moment for about a year. So
I'm deeply impressed. As a sister, like,
thank you. Thank you. Right, yeah, stand at the back. All right.
My brother's here too, but he was kindly.
You were a good brother. Oh, I like that. He gave you a personal shame.
All right, getting back to it. Is there anything in your book, if you could pick one thing that could exist in real life, what would it be?
mine is deeply foolish, but because a lot of the things in my world are very dangerous and I would like to look at them from afar and then never ever get near them. But there is one thing I put in that was total wish fulfillment on my part, and it's that, the beginning of one of the chapters of Prince Ali's chapter starts, and he's praying in the masjid, and we take our shoes off when we're in the mosque, and we put them in a cabinet, and you're already laughing at me, yeah. And it just seemed to me, I invented a little magical creature that eats my personal shoelaces, and, they take your shoes. They're not stored in the cabinet where kids can go get them and then throw them at people during prayer. This little magical creature grabs them, washes them up, while you do your salat, you leave, it's fantastic, you're done. And it seems like a missed opportunity to me.
I'm gonna go broad and say portals. Portals. I've been looking for portals since I was young. I still have dreams that I find portals always in the shower wall. I don't know what that means about me. I won't even speculate. But yeah, to this day, I when I was a kid too, I'd get excited and I'd run to the bathroom and be disappointed every time. So portals, which I'm not fully convinced there aren't. There probably aren't, but we'll leave it at that.
I remember when I was little and I was like, I really want to find Narnia, but then I locked myself in a closet and I was like, I'm stuck. And it was terrible. Or sometimes, do you ever do sleepovers and you have a sleeping bag and you're crawling to the end of the sleeping bag, but then
I never tried that one.
it's fun. Crawl to the end of the sleeping bag, just I'm going on an adventure. I'm suffocating. Help! What object do I want? Stop! my own portal fantasy of my mind. It's terrible. Okay, well, I just want something really shiny, really. So the magic system in the Gilded Wolves is a system called forging. So it's able to bring things to life. And I would really like a living dress, but not like a sentient dress that's like, you look terrible and I refuse to be seen with you, so I killed you kind of thing. Which a dark turn. Sorry. Just a nice, happy, pretty ballroom gown.
I want a forged nightlight flower, just saying.
Oh, yeah, that's also pretty. That sounds nice. Well, lots of good, my magic system's pretty much like, this is great for interior design. That is it. It's pretty, yeah. I did leave. All right.
What are some of the defining traits of your main characters?
Well, I only have one main character, so Slytherin. One of my favorite Slytherins is here. Hi. That's the big one.
That doesn't say a lot about
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground.
We have a lot of characters in this book. I'd say Severin is like defining characters. I don't know. He's like that guy that would like spend way too much time on his Instagram layout, but then like his profile would be private. But he would just but he would just be like, the aesthetic's perfect. It's amazing. Nobody can see it. Enrique would be the guy that's like always sending you like, I thought you'd be interested in this article from Wall Street Journal, and then like nobody reads it. Like, that's sad. Hypnos is just, I really love him, but he's a trash fire. And so that's Hypnos. Layla's great. She's the mom friend. She will always somehow have food in her purse. Zofia will walk away from you in the middle of a conversation. And Tristan's really sweet, and he'll just be like, want to go look at the gardens? I'm like, okay, yeah. That's kind of them.
I have two main characters, and my one main character, Nahri, especially in this book, she's training to become a physician, and she's dealing with all of these political responsibilities as well. And I fully wrote my imposter syndrome into Nahri about, just having to stand up and do something and just pretend you have that confidence, or kind of just swallow back that feeling of like, is this the right path? Is this not? I wrote that into Nahri, and then Ali, it's funny because he's a very religious young man, and he's not the most socially skilled, and people are always like, how did you come up with this character? And I was like, I remember myself when I was 18. Let's just move on.
Do you have any writing advice that you would offer to everyone, and what are your ideal writing conditions?
Ideal conditions are the daytime of my baby sleeping. I used to have a lot of conditions, but now that's it. So before he was born, I had like my whole like a writing cape and like a candle. They're all arrayed about me. Yeah, now I'm just like, is he asleep? So it simplifies things. And writing advice. Oh, well, I have one drafting trick that I find really useful, which is just kind of more of a nitty-gritty thing than anything broader, which is if you're finding a scene to be intimidating, or the blank page to be generally intimidating, I'll just like draft with my thumbs and like a notes draft on my phone. And you can kind of like hang out like a few hundred words that way and then move over, and I find that very useful.
I've actually written an entire scene in track changes, just because I'm like, oh, it's on the margins, therefore it doesn't count. But it does count, but it doesn't. So I can write it.
I think ideal writing conditions, same. I have a 5-year-old. When she's at school, I write. When it's 4 o'clock in the morning, I do a lot of writing before she wakes up. That's kind of my thing. And my one indulgence lately has been good tea, because I'm trying to wean myself off having like 5 cups of coffee a day. So I'm like, okay, I'll have like fancy tea that will take me more time to make. But in terms of writing advice, I think the thing I tell people is try not to get caught up in the details. A lot of times just drafting is better. Just get through something, get through the end. You can always write more in capital letters that you need to know. You have to go back. You can always just write a couple bullet points. This is what I wanted to happen here, but I can't get it out right now, and just kind of move on. It always is a little bit easier to look at the whole story once it's done, rather than kind of feel like you have to get a scene right away.
I have a lot of writing conditions. I only have a cat. But I still feel like this is very annoying, because Teddy will sometimes he'll just sit on my laptop as the day goes on. He'll just be like, I've had enough of this. Feed me. Because I'm balancing 2 books a year, which is really exciting and terrifying. I spend a lot of time like curating my candle collection because I feel like I can only write a certain book to a certain candle. I don't know why that
Do
is.
the same thing.
It's like a scent memory thing. Yeah. It's great. I have a tomato candle.
What scent was the Gilded Wolves?
Tomato. Can't you tell from reading it? Doesn't it
Smell like a tomato?
I'm so intrigued. It's not like marinara sauce. It's like the smell of tomato stems and tomato leaves, which is a very, very specific scent. It's like sunshine steeped dirt.
Where did you get this?
Candlefish. Yes. I will send everybody to like literally everyone's like a tomato candle. But they're great. And you too will write a treasure hunt book. I don't know. So those are my ideal writing conditions. Although I will say that depending on the scene, sometimes I have to be somewhere else. Like if I'm writing anything remotely romantic, I don't know why, but I feel like whenever I'm at home, my parents can like sense when I'm writing something like that. They'll like barge in. My dad will always barge in and just be like, "Hey kids, you want to watch John Oliver?" I'm like, "What? How do you know what I'm doing right now?" Like slam down the laptop. He's like, "What is that? Nothing. Can I see it? No." And writing advice. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it all before, but read widely. But I would also constantly remind yourself that you have no expiration date. And that a good story isn't like milk. It's not going to go bad if you give it more time. And that you're only racing against yourself. So don't feel pressured by that. It's going to be fine. Get a tomato candle.
Along with writing, what has been your happiest moment during the publishing process so far?
It's really petty stuff. It's like, the guy that dumped you in 7th grade over AIM that you see when your outfit is great and he's just like, "So what are you doing now?" Like, "I'm a New York Times bestselling author. It's fine." That's really fun. And also fan art. Like, you guys are just the best. Like, there's something so humbling about someone who's so excited to see you and you're like, "Wow, I literally talk to my cat all day." But there's someone reading what we're doing. That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah, that's definitely, especially I remember my lunch party, I was still so new to all of this and I was like, I guess people are reading it because they're buying the book. And I had a young woman come to my launch party and she had done fan art of one of the characters and she had like printed it out and mounted it like in beautiful fashion. And I was so touched. I was just like, I couldn't believe somebody had done that for the character that was in my head, and it was just continuing to interact with readers is just fantastic. I mean, you're like, really? You're reading like the people who are in my head and you like them and you're like all into it. It's very, very nice.
So I had this moment when I called my mom and told her that I sold a book, and she just like laughed really, really hard with like joy. And then she told the story she always tells, which I knew she was, like when you love someone, you're like, and now there's that story. Like, when the anecdotes come, like the various, So she told her anecdote about, she's like, when you were 4, you'd bring me paper and you'd say, "Mommy, write my story." And I'm like, "I know, Mom." Yeah, so, getting high. So that was a really nice moment. My mom's so sweet.
I feel like all those things, though, they kind of illustrate, like, the amazing thing about writing stories is that they go on to live thousands of different lives with our readers. And with the people who know us, they become something completely different. And that's really magical.
What are 3 of the best books that you read last year?
How dare you?
Can we just say a rule that we can't say so that we're not just like, "You're the best and you're the best,"
Yeah, I think that's a good rule. I genuinely meant it.
I mean it too. But I don't want to use up my store of 3.
Okay, can I just look through the last 3 books that I read that I really liked? I can't really remember. I'm like, what's 2018? What was I doing? Who am I? I very recently started reading Colleen Hoover, and I read Verity for the first time, and it like gave me just a panic attack. I had so much cortisol like racing through my veins that I just like shot out of bed at 2 a.m. and was like, "I'm going to go out now. Who would like to accompany me to go out?" So that was great. And oh my gosh, I can't remember. Oh, a book called The Perfect Meal by John Baxter. I love books about food, and it's like it's a culinary history of France. And there's all this really interesting stuff, like during the siege in the 19th century, where they had to eat the zoo animals, and stuff got weird. But like these French chefs were like, "We're still gonna make it fancy elephant consomme. And you're like, what? It's a delight. It's so weird. Yeah, and another nonfiction rec, because I love nonfiction, was Napoleon's Buttons, 17 molecules that changed the history of the world. And it's exactly what it sounds like. If you don't like organic chemistry, just skip the beginning parts like I always did, and then just go straight to the story. It was great.
Actually, one of the first one I'm going to recommend got very good news today, and it is The Empire of Sands by Tasha Suri, and it is fantastic, and you should all read it. It's an epic fantasy, and it's loosely inspired by Mughal Indian sort of history, sort of aesthetics, and it is being developed for TV apparently, so it's very good. The second I would say is The Pasha Cuisine, which is historical fantasy set in the Ottoman Empire, and it's by a Turkish author. The English translation just came out this year, and it's a chef who is fighting to get back the woman he loves, and he does it with food magic. And he travels, yes, it's fantastic. I have multiple copies I can give you. But he travels all over the world learning different elements of his craft, and then he uses it to make his way through to save the woman he loves. It's great. It has a very good dry wit to it. And then the third book is one I'm reading right now, and I'm getting close to being done with it, and it's historical fantasy. It's called The Watermelon Boys, and it's by Ruqayya Ziyadeen, and it's a look at World War I and the Arab revolt, or essentially the revolution for freedom, through the eyes of Iraqis rather than the British and all the people who were like, oh, World War I is Downton Abbey, and then, these glorious days of empire. And it's one of those historical fiction books you read, and it's just, the characters come through and breathe in a way that can be very rare to find in a book that takes place, in the past, and it's fantastic. And I always recommend, people, ask, science fiction, fantasy, what should I be reading to, become a better writer? And I tell people, read historical fiction, because you are also reading about a different time, and good writers of historical fiction that can bridge that will tell you how to write a story about the fantastic just as well.
Heidi Heilig's from Muse of Fire is a series starter, and it's about a girl who is a shadow player, and she can use her blood to bind the souls of the dead to objects and make them dance. So she'll like a dead kitten, she'll grab its spirit and bind it to a piece of paper and it'll flitter around. But it's also about colonialism, and it's about family, and it's about mental illness and love, and it's so rich, and it really feels like a ghost is rattling around in your ear when you read it, and it's so beautiful. Her Girl from Everywhere duology is brilliant, and this is even, I think, bigger and better and richer. Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. I love that book. It's like every boy I had a crush on in college, but well, I don't have to date him, which is good. I just get to read about him. It's wonderful. It's specific. It's college set YA, which there's more of those now, which is really exciting. And I think it actually got a lot of great attention, which is wonderful, because there should be more college set YAs. Oh, and then, so I read An Ember in the Ashes years ago, and I was I love it, but it's a little bit too violent for me. And then I went back, and I was I just gotta get over it. And I read the next two, and they're brilliant, which everyone already knew. But I just got back into that world and kind of got over the violence, and it's awesome. So I can't wait for book 4.
What can you guys tell us about what you're currently working on?
The title's really evocative.
Thank you.
The Night Country, and it's out this fall. And all I can tell you is that it's called The Night Country, and it's out this fall.
Very informative. I just turned in the first draft of the sequel for The Gilded Wolves, and so the problem sometimes with writing historical fantasy is that you get bogged down with details. I wanted to write the sentence originally, in the earlier draft of The Gilded Wolves, of he walked over and he put ice in his glass. And then I was like, wait, did they have ice in 1889? And it launched a 2-day just spiral into the history of ice manufacturing. Let me tell you, it's phenomenal. Literally, this one guy was just staring, it's hot outside, he's like, man, this lemonade would have been better if it was cold. And then his friend next to him was like, yo, wait. And that's literally what happened, and they had to do this brand campaign of ice, because when they brought it to the tropics, people were like, no. They're like, don't you want ice cream? They're like, we have no idea what that is. Get this witch water away from us. But I had to end up taking out that entire paragraph, and out of pure spite, the entirety of book 2 is set in an ice palace. So that's all I can tell you.
I am working on the third book, the final book in the Devabad trilogy, and I'm trying to draft very quickly because this comes out next week, and I'm going to shut my computer off and all my notifications because I know how the second book ends. I know how people are going to feel. So I'm working very hard on book 3. I'll go get you a draft.
I'm literally staring like I was up there.
Now I think we're going to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions they want to ask.
Ask your question
Yeah.
for us.
I didn't actually have a question.
Oh.
She just has a rebuttal to what?
A rebuttal. Yeah. Shame.
So this is for Roshani. Hi.
Hi.
I have a question about tackling the amount of diversity that's in your book. Was it kind of daunting at first to go from a Filipino character to an Algerian character? Hello, I'm Algerian. Hi. So to get that, like in YA, we've never really seen that. So to kind of get that, I mean, we have, but it's not as much as personally I would like it to be. So tackling that, how was it for you, kind of?
So the question was about, the diversity in the Gilded Wolves, and all these characters have such different backgrounds. And what it was like to write it. It was really daunting. It was really, really hard. I hired a lot of sensitivity readers for the Gilded Wolves. And I think that's honestly my best piece of advice. If you're writing an experience outside of your own, it doesn't make you a bad writer to ask the opinion of other people who know it better and who that's like their lived experience. It's a responsible thing to do. And I think that sometimes we talk about like write your truth, but I'm paraphrasing from my good friend S.J. Jones, but she calls it write what you know to be true. So even if I shared nothing in common with someone who's French-Algerian from 1889, I know that at the heart of my characters, there's 2 questions driving all of them. And that is, they're either driven by a need for love or a need to protect. And I think that's true of all characters and all people, that this is like a driving thing within us. So their background just became the framework through which I looked at that question. But it was immensely rewarding, and I learned so much. And honestly, you will never make everybody happy, but that's okay. You just have to sort of live with it. And if you know that you did your best, you did your research, you tried to do no harm, I think there's a lot to be said for that, because our readers deserve to see themselves in stories. And feeling scared is not an excuse.
But I'm from the Philippines, so it's just super refreshing to see like Enrique in the book because he actually speaks Tagalog and he's part of the rebellion against Spain. That was really cool. But I wanted to ask about like when you were creating Enrique, did you have to do a lot of research outside, like asking your parents like, hey, is this how he talks in Tagalog? And it's just like in general like the beliefs that he had about Spain. How did you gather all of that?
Yeah, but I really want to hear what you guys have to say about this too. The question of when we're doing like our individual research on characters, and even if they share so much in common with us, the extra mile that we have to go. So my mom is from the Philippines, and she has been on my case nonstop. She's like, oh, it's really funny that all your books have like Indian mythology. LOL, it's like I'm not here. Like, thank you, mother. I really appreciate that. It's awful. And Asian moms are really good at like the sweet passive-aggressive guilt. So it's like she'll make your favorite food and just be like, it's cool that you completely erased me, and like walk away. Like, what? Come back. So yeah, it was a great conversation with my mom a lot of the time, because I share a lot of things in common with Enrique. Both of us are mixed race. There's always the question of what it means to be white passing or not Asian enough for Asian communities, to always know that the people who are supposed to accept you are otherizing you. And a couple years ago, we actually went to the Philippines, and it was a really incredible experience to be there and to look at what the scars that colonialism, for almost 400 years of Spanish rule, left on the Philippines. To the point where all those surnames are Spanish. The mythology has sort of been scraped over, and what's left are very, very rich and terrifying ghost stories and tales of monsters like Manananggal and stuff like that. I think that says a lot when all that remains is the horror. So it was a lot to unpack, and I know she's happy, and so I'm happy too.
Was she one of your readers?
Whereas my mom, yeah, a little bit for like some of the scenes, but like my mom is sometimes excruciatingly awkward. So like when she read The Star-Touched Queen, she like on speakerphone to her whole family, I love that romance. No, no. I literally just like spontaneously combusted. It's awful. Do your parents read your stuff?
I had a very similar experience. So my first debut year of publishing, I was just in a fog of like, this is not really happening. And you know, everybody in my family was very proud, and my father-in-law wanted to read the book. And I just, of course you can read the book, like I've done something well. And I gave it to him. And then I remembered that there's a scene in that book when two characters are in a cave, and there's things happening that are not very appropriate. And he went from, he always talked, I'm reading the book, and then we never spoke again. Him reading the book. I don't know if he finished the book. I don't know if he stopped at that scene, but it's one of those things we just kind of gloss over. He's still very kind and proud. We're just never going to talk about that again. So, like, how are you two?
My dad's read 2 books in the last 15 years, and one was the Da Vinci Code and one was the Hazelwood. My mom reads a lot, though, and they're very proud. I'm trying to think. I feel like there's like not a sex scene in my book. I'm just going to spoil you all now. But there is like one line where someone talks about losing their virginity, and I feel like my dad just like brought that line up. Like, why though? I think he wanted to make it okay. He's like, I'm
a cool dad. Like, no. I didn't. My dad's the same way. I'm just like, you don't need to read the book. I'm like, that's fine. I've already got my father-in-law. You don't ever need to read the book.
I feel you.
Did you guys have any inspiration writing it? One of my favorite series is The Land of Stories by Chris Colfer. So did you guys have any like inspiration writing your book? Like, did you read any like fantasy or like anything else to inspire you to be like, I want to write a book like that?
I actually came to fantasy a little bit late. I was a big science fiction fan when I was a teenager, and I read what, you know, is not shelved in fantasy, but a lot of folktales or just a lot of books that are fantasy. They're just not written by American authors, so we don't call them as such. And there's one book that really sticks out in my mind, and it's by Naguib Mahfouz, who's an Egyptian writer, and it feels weird to introduce him as that because he's like one of the greatest writers in the world, and he's won the Nobel Prize, and he has all these fantastic books. But one that really stuck with me is it's, you know, Arabian Nights and Days, and it's essentially what happens after the 1,000 Nights are told, and it's short and it's snappy, and it just mixes politics and satire about magic, about corruption, about tyrants. And I read it, and I didn't, you know, I think I was maybe 16, 15 when I read it, and I had never read anything like that looked at power and politics, and just, it was so tongue-in-cheek and so cruel and so terrible, but it was fantastic. And that's something I try to emulate in my writing, that you can be talking about these things that are very grave and, you know, difficult to write about, and kind of have an edge of dark humor.
That was so deep. I literally just wanted to write National Treasure. I was just like, I'm tired of looking at Nicolas Cage's face. I will make better faces. But then it got deep, and it was very rude of the book, which required a lot of research and a lot of wasted paragraphs about the history of ice.
It wasn't wasted. You used it for the Ice Palace.
I haven't found a way to like work in the history of ice though, because if I talk about it, then I'll just it's like at odds with the magic.
Just be like, you know the history of ice.
Great opening line.
I will just stand with you on the street and I'll just practice it.
It'll be great. After you heard about ice, everyone's like, run away.
It's like one of the most awkward moment, like with one of your relatives with your books.
Yeah, I'm done with that question.
A fun, awkward, not like a, I don't know. Well, so when I still go to like Indian parties and stuff, there's still a bunch of people that are like, so, you know, you did your first book, now are you going to go to medical school? And I'm just like, no, I won't go. So it's not really an awkward thing for me, but my mom's new fun petty thing is to like sort of casually drop into conversation. The book was optioned for a film. Something like that, which is always really great and fun. And yeah, I don't know. But then it's just like, oh, can I be in it? Is like literally every cousin's question. I can't be in it. You certainly can't.
I told my friend my book had been optioned, and he goes, I've always wanted to be an actor.
Our loved
Unrelated.
ones are just like, this is my moment. The swan's in. It's horrible. Yeah, my love interest and my fiance have like, their names are so close. They're like one letter apart, so he thinks that Like the book is about him. I haven't told him.
Severin?
No, from Star Touch Queen. You're just like, I'm pretty sure that's not his name. I did dedicate the Gilded Wolves to him. I'm really excited for people to see that dedication. Yeah, it was a good moment. It was pathetic.
I'm gonna take this because, have you guys heard of Taylor Mack? They're like a cabaret performer, brilliant genius person. Their chosen gender pronoun is Judy. I love them. Taylor Mack, everyone should look them up. But in my fantasies, Taylor Mack would play the spinner, who is a character in my book. So that's all I'll say.
I just want Rami Malek to be separate. I think that was like half my Pinterest was just his face. Oh well. I can dream.
People always ask me, and I'm like, I don't know any actor names. Like, I've been on Zedline for 3 years. I haven't watched anything. So I can't really answer that, except I joke about, because this would never happen, but I feel like Idris Elba would make a cool Ghassan.
Ooh.
Yes, right? Like, he's got the whole, like, charming power, like, king thing going on. Yeah.
I love it.
Like, you would be honored to be like, all right, I guess I'll be crushed under your boot.
I think we have time to take 2 more questions. If anyone doesn't, I have another question, actually. Let's say Marie.
A hand. And a person.
I heard what you were about to say.
I just said Bobby Dan.
What Hogwarts houses would you say your character? I know you said Slytherin, but like, what Hogwarts houses would you say your characters are?
I think they're all like a Ravenclaw hybrid. These are just like nerds trying their best. They're just really trying. Yeah. Nerds trying their best.
Yeah, I have to agree with that first point as well. I think like they'd be friends.
I think so.
Yeah, not Ollie, not her would be friends with your crew.
Slytherins and Gryffindors. in my book.
Any other questions? Or should I ask mine? I don't see hands, so I'm going to go for it. Alright. So let's say that Marie Kondo comes to your house, just that all of her books on fire, and you can choose one thing. What would you choose?
Like a book or like
one book.
Oh, okay.
She's only burning your books today.
Okay. I was just like, you have nothing left in your home.
It has to be like a useless object that doesn't bring me enough joy. Wait.
No.
It sounds like you just allowed one book.
You can choose one book that's
I can take
first
one
most
book.
joy.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. I have a copy of a Neil Gaiman book, and sadly it's not one of my favorite Neil Gaiman books, but he signed it. And he signed it, when I was a kid, I had like an indie zine with my friends, and we all took pseudonyms that were from The Sandman.
Love that.
Yeah. So he signed it to Mimi, who is no longer Nuala, because I was Nuala. And I was like, yeah.
What book
I
is
say
it
that. It's Trigger Warning. Yeah, which I like, but I wanted it to be Sandman, obviously.
Obviously. Hell we go. Oh, you know what? This may seem like a superficial answer, but I have a book of jewelry called by Lydia Crutet, and there's something that I think is just extraordinarily fascinating about the history of jewelry making and all the things and how they fit together. And so even though it's not nostalgic, it kind of reminds me of the reason why I write stories. Not to buy more jewelry, but that too. But also that the sense that every story is in itself a jewel. That when you hold it up to the light, there's thousands of different facets that remind you of how to see the world. And I think that for me, I always need that reminder to be brought out of my own headspace and to look at something beautiful or to look at something hideous and to think about the world a different way. So I would keep that.
So hard because at first I think I'm like, wait, if we're getting to burning, like I have a lot of religious texts, should probably say that first. But I'm going to be selfish and say I would keep an arc of my first book because I just did not think something like this would ever happen. And I just remember, hearing that it had sold, hearing that it was going to be printed, seeing the cover, and just I can't even find words to describe how it felt for me to hold it for the first time. So I'm going to be selfish and let the others burn. Except the religious texts. Those are